Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be talking about something super important, I think, for anyone, involved with churches, whether you're a pastor or a volunteer or just a member of a congregation.
Yeah.
And that is this idea of mental health and spirituality. We've got this really interesting book here called Mental Health in Search of Spirituality, and it's by a Christian psychiatrist, Dr. Kam Wong. So I think this is going to be really relevant, given your interest in how churches can kind of better support their members when it comes to mental health.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about this book is that it kind of starts off by not shying away from this, this reality of this mental health crisis that we're facing, and not just in the world in general, but also, within the church as well. Dr. Wong actually starts out the book by painting a pretty stark picture of the situation here in Australia.
Yeah. I mean, he uses some statistics that are really hard to ignore, right? Like he highlights that 25% of all Australians are dealing with a diagnosable mental health condition.
Mm.
And that's at any given time. It's not just something we see in, specialized settings or anything. He says that 90% of primary care visits are actually linked to mental health.
That's huge, right? I mean, it really emphasizes how this isn't just an issue for, some people. It's woven into the fabric of our society. And so, if those numbers reflect the general population, you have to think about what that means for, those within the church community as well.
That's the question he asks, right? And it's one that can make people uncomfortable. Because there's often this assumption, I think, that Christians, because of their faith, should be kind of immune to these struggles.
And that's what I think this book does so well. It provides this wake-up call. Dr. Wong, drawing on his experience as a psychiatrist for over 30 years, he argues that Christians aren't just susceptible to these issues, but they might actually face unique challenges specifically because of how mental health is perceived within the church sometimes.
So it's not just about acknowledging that these issues exist. It's about understanding how the church environment itself might actually be playing a role.
Exactly. He even gives some examples in the book of, Christian patients delaying treatment or even dropping out of therapy early because they felt like it conflicted with their faith or that it meant that, they didn't have enough faith.
It's almost like this pressure to just rely on prayer and spiritual practices.
Yeah.
Rather than, actually seeking professional help as well.
And that's a dangerous misconception that he really tackles head on in this book. He really emphasizes that faith and therapy aren't mutually exclusive. They can and really should work together for, true healing.
And it seems like his unique perspective as both a psychiatrist and as a Christian is really what makes his insights here so valuable.
For sure. He bridges those two worlds so well in a way that is both insightful and practical. And he really advocates for this holistic approach, where faith isn't just like an add-on, but it's an integral part of that healing journey.
Yeah, and from what I understand, he doesn't just speak in generalities. He gives some concrete examples of how this integration of faith and clinical practice can actually work in real-life situations. So let's delve into those examples in the next part of our deep dive.
You're totally right. He doesn't just, talk about the theory or anything. He actually shares stories from his own practice where he's actually seen this approach work, with his patients. One that I thought was really interesting was about this patient who was struggling with pretty severe anxiety.
Okay. And that's something that I think, a lot of people in churches can relate to. So what happened in that case?
Well, through therapy and medication, this person did see some improvement, but it wasn't until they actually started intentionally incorporating their faith into the process that they really experienced this major breakthrough. So Dr. Wong helped them to kind of weave things like prayer and scripture meditation, and even just, connecting with their church community into their daily routine.
So it became less about compartmentalizing their faith and their mental health.
Yeah.
And more about seeing them as, part of this whole person approach.
Exactly. And the results were really incredible. This person, not only found symptom relief, but they also found this deeper sense of peace and purpose that was rooted in their relationship with Jesus.
That makes me think about that verse in John 16:33, where Jesus says, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." It's like acknowledging the reality of suffering, but at the same time offering this source of hope and strength. Does Dr. Wong mention that verse at all?
He does. It's actually one of the verses he uses to kind of underscore his whole approach, because he really believes that a personal relationship with Jesus can be such a powerful source of healing and resilience, especially when we're facing these kinds of challenges.
It sounds like he's kind of offering this blueprint for churches to become like these beacons of hope and support for their members. But how does he suggest that churches actually do that? I mean, it's one thing to talk about this integration, but it's another to actually put it into practice.
Yeah, you're right. And he recognizes that, a lot of churches feel unequipped when it comes to dealing with these issues. So he actually gives some really specific guidance on how congregations can create a more supportive and understanding environment.
Like what kind of guidance? Give me some examples.
Well, he encourages pastors and church leaders to, educate themselves, first of all, about mental health, to really try to reduce the stigma that's often associated with it, and to actively promote resources that can actually, help people. He even shares this really inspiring story about a church that actually did this really well. They actually successfully integrated mental health support into their ministry.
Okay, that's great. It shows that it can be done. But how do we bridge that gap, between like good intentions and effective action? Because I imagine there were probably some pastors out there who might be a little hesitant, like they feel like they're stepping outside of their lane a little bit.
It's a valid concern for sure. But Dr. Wong really argues that, caring for the mental and emotional well-being of the members is very much within a pastor's lane. It's like an extension of pastoral care, not a replacement for it.
I think there's still this fear out there that acknowledging mental health struggles somehow, diminishes the power of faith or undermines the role of the church.
And Dr. Wong addresses that head on. He explains that, recognizing the complexity of these issues, the biological factors, the psychological factors, that doesn't negate the importance of faith. It just means that we're acknowledging, the full picture of what it means to be human.
It's not an either situation. It's about recognizing the value of both, faith and those clinical practices in helping people experience healing and wholeness.
Absolutely. And this idea of wholeness is really central to his thinking. And he actually connects it beautifully to this concept that's, really at the heart of our faith. And that's the fatherhood of God.
Oh, wow. I wouldn't immediately think to connect those two things, the fatherhood of God and mental health. So how does he make that link?
Well, he suggests that understanding God as, this loving father, someone who cares so deeply about every single aspect of our lives, including our mental and emotional well-being, that can be incredibly transformative.
So it's about reframing our whole approach to mental health through this lens of, compassionate parent who wants the best for their children.
That's a great way to put it. And he goes on to explore how this understanding can really impact, how we view ourselves, how we cope with challenges, and even how we seek healing.
It's like by embracing our identity as these beloved children of God, we're finding this source of strength and security that can help us navigate those storms of life, including, the ones related to our mental health.
Yeah, and he doesn't just leave it at that. He actually gives these really practical exercises and reflections to help people connect with that fatherly love in a tangible way.
That's what I love about this book. It's not just offering information, it's actually providing a roadmap for people to experience that healing and transformation. I'm really curious to hear about some of those practical elements.
Yeah, he dives into those in the latter part of the book. I think you'll find them really helpful.
Okay, so we've talked about, those stats around mental health, even within Christian communities. And we've talked about how Dr. Wong really encourages this holistic approach, blending faith and those clinical practices. But it sounds like he takes even a step further and connects it to, some of those core beliefs that we hold as Christians.
Yeah, he really does. And it's amazing how he kind of weaves it all together. He suggests that this idea of understanding the fatherhood of God can be so powerful for someone who's struggling with their mental health.
I was thinking about what, someone who's maybe listening right now and they're in the middle of, battling anxiety or depression. How would that concept actually help them?
He points out that when we really grasp the depth of God's love for us as our father, it changes how we see ourselves. Instead of, feeling defined by our struggles, we can find our worth and our security in his love. And that's unshakable.
That's a big shift in perspective, isn't it? It's not about denying the reality of, those mental health challenges, but it's about finding a source of strength that's bigger than our circumstances.
Exactly. And he actually gives some really practical ways to make that connection, he encourages people to reflect on those scripture passages that highlight God's fatherly heart. Spending time in prayer, just resting in that love, and even visualizing themselves being embraced by a compassionate father.
So we're not just thinking about it in our heads, right? We're actually trying to experience that love in a real way.
Yeah, exactly. And that experience can be so healing. He actually shares some stories of his patients who, by really embracing this concept, they found freedom from that fear and anxiety that they were dealing with, and even a renewed sense of purpose that was rooted in, their identity as these beloved children of God.
I love that. It makes me think about like the ripple effects. What if churches really embraced this message and created environments where people felt safe to be vulnerable, to acknowledge their struggles, and to receive that kind of love and support?
That's exactly what he's hoping for. He sees churches not just as places for, spiritual instruction, but as these sanctuaries of healing and wholeness.
Yeah.
Where faith and mental health go hand in hand. And the best part is he doesn't just leave it as like a nice idea. He gives some practical steps for churches to actually create those supportive environments.
For anyone listening who's like, okay, I'm ready to take action, whether it's in their own church or just in their own personal life, what are some of those steps?
Well, one of the big ones is education. So he encourages churches to host, workshops and seminars, invite mental health professionals to speak, make resources available to people so they can understand these issues, but understand them from a biblical perspective. He also talks about the importance of creating spaces for, just open and honest conversations where people don't feel judged.
It's about changing the culture within our churches, right? So that mental health is treated with that same compassion and care that we would show to someone who's, dealing with any other kind of struggle.
Absolutely. And then for individuals, he talks about things like self-care practices, seeking professional help when you need it, and building those strong support networks within your church community.
It's a good reminder that we're not meant to go through this alone, right? We have a loving Father who walks with us, and we have each other to lean on and encourage. This has been such a great conversation. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this book.
It really is full of great information. So definitely pick up a copy if you're interested.
Absolutely. If you want to delve deeper into this topic, Dr. Wong's book, Mental Health in Search of Spirituality, is available at a bunch of different places. You can get it